Hi, good evening. Welcome back to Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm a psychiatrist in Southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack, and I work as a drug and alcohol counselor. And we've been doing this now for...
It's supposed to be like a fifth or sixth show, right?
55th show, and I just want to restate that, you know, one of the reasons we're doing this is that we actually want to be helpful. And one of the things about mental illness and addictions is we think the stigma of it really stops a lot of people from getting the help that they could receive. People are just afraid of being mentally ill. They know that there's something wrong, they're concerned, they're worried, but they're just afraid to talk about it or to reach out for help. And so one of our hopes is that by making it local, making it people that live in the community, and maybe we could talk about it and really destigmatize some of the associations, and also be a little bit less judgmental about addictions. I mean, I think because of the behaviors or sort of false impressions that people have, they're just afraid of the words, and they're afraid if they say it. Everybody knows that someone might be dependent on drugs and alcohol, but they're afraid if they say it, then it will become, something that now it's a fact. Right. And so even though the behavior's there and everything else is there, they just don't want to acknowledge it. So I'm hoping that by talking about it and people watching this show and perhaps calling in, we can get people to feel more comfortable about it.
Yeah,
so.
and I mean, you're seeing this as a public service, and not meaning to offer sort of therapeutic advice or actual sort of medical advice on the show, but rather an educational approach, and like you're saying, Robert, to help people realize that this is kind of normal. I mean, as a matter of fact, I'm giving a presentation tomorrow at the hospital in Bennington, and talking to a mixed crowd of doctors and their staff as well as nurses there, and talking about sort of addiction in primary care. And as I'm breaking it up, the first section that I'm going to address it is I'm calling it normalizing it, because there really are we are so much more alike than we are different when we think about addiction and mental illness. Mm-hmm. And I think when we think about people with these problems as them or as different from us, that we really do a disservice to them.
That's right. Yeah. And again, we want to take a moment just to thank BCTV and all the people who have helped us put on this show. It's a learning process. We're continuing to learn what the best way to do it and how to make it useful. So if anybody has any suggestions or comments, please send them to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll listen.
I know families have been good about sort of the stage present piece of this.
So why don't we start with,
sure.
We have some questions?
Sure. So the first one today is, how do you know what is anxiety and what is depression? Sometimes it all just feels like the same overwhelming sense of impending doom. Yeah, that's wonderful, because really, I mean, the depression and anxiety, in my experience, have been so intertwined with each other that oftentimes it's difficult to tell if there is any kind of difference, because they seem to kind of travel with each other.
Now, if you don't mind, right?
Oh, please.
I worked with a man, Don Annis, who lived in this community, and he worked at the retreat for 35 years or more, and he was a head of psych testing. And he was my mentor when I first started in the field. And he once explained to me in some ways that, and this is not scientific or anything, but he said one of the concerns is that depression is often this sort of fear of where you are, that today is going to be like yesterday, that it's never ending, and there is no sense of relief. I mean, most of us can suffer with pain and stuff as long as we know it's going to end. Yeah. And he even said that's one of the reasons why some depressed people don't want to get out of bed or don't want to leave the house, because they just think it's going to be more of the same. Whereas anxiety, he says it's more about fear of what's going to happen. And even though this fear has been unfounded many times, the fear of getting on an elevator or fear of heights, the anxiety is really not based on past experience, but really based on this fear of something is going to happen. Right. But he also said, just like you did, he used to think that depression and anxiety were actually two different sides of the same coin. And I, in some of my work with folks, I know a lot of people that are just very, and I think they're sort of like, they struggle with fear a lot. And I don't know if they recognize it as fear, but they have a lot of, it's almost excessive worry. I don't know how else to say that. But so anyway, depression has very, specific symptoms, and we could talk about some of the symptoms, and so does anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
But I think a lot of it has to do with fear.
Oh, absolutely. And sort of this false apprehension of what's going to happen in the future. There's even an older, sort of like, Freudian or analytical way of looking at it, that you sort of learn how to continue to have this anxiety and fear. So you're worrying about all these sort of irrational things that might happen, these unlikely things that are going to happen. And you sort of develop that pattern that, oh, look at this, I continue to worry about these things, and so they don't happen.
Right.
Which kind of reinforces that.
And that was something that someone told me, that every time I avoid something that I'm anxious about, I reinforce that anxiety.
Yeah, that's a safer path.
Stronger. Right, and I need to sort of not allow myself to do that. Because sometimes it's sort of easy to just talk yourself into not going somewhere or doing something because of your fear.
Yeah.
And you think avoidance is a good way to do it, but it's really not, because it just makes it stronger.
And some advice is actually run to the fear. If you have this thing that you fear, go do it.
Go do it.
And therefore you're going to reinforce a whole different pattern.
Right.
But it's hard to separate these two things from each other, because if you look at the what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is DSM for short, which is essentially the diagnostic Bible. This is what everybody uses to determine what is depression, what is anxiety, what's schizophrenia. And when you look at depression and anxiety, and you look at sort of the list of symptoms as a part of each of those, you have difficulties with sleep. You have this sort of feeling of being nervous and revved up. It impacts your appetite. It impacts your concentration. So I think when you look at sort of these overlapping sets of symptoms, which are the majority of the symptoms for either depression or anxiety, I think that helps us realize too that whatever research or expert opinion there is also saying that very well these two things travel together very often. And I think that's why you often find talk therapies are recommended for both of these. Antidepressants as a medication are recommended for both of these. And truthfully, just talking about our own experience, I'm surprised if somebody tells me they're depressed and they're not also having a sense of anxiety accompanying that too.
And I think it's worth also saying sometimes people use these terms, anxiety and depression, and it doesn't have to be the extent of a psychiatric disorder.
Right.
I hope that's okay to say.
Oh, these are natural. Anxiety is giving me a signal from my environment that there's something that I'm afraid of, or I should be afraid of, or I don't need to be afraid of, but I am anyway.
And when I used to do grief counseling, I used to sometimes talk about one of the stages that Kubler-Ross used to say is depression. And I think there is a certain amount of sadness and depressed, but it's more external, and your concern is more when it becomes internal, when you feel so empty inside and nothing will ever be good and that kind of stuff. But so I just want to say that there are very clinical things by the time you're thinking about killing yourself. I mean, we're working with depression, or people who are overly anxious, or with PTSD or something like that. I mean, that's a little different.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ways to look at this, because depression and anxiety have been around as long as we can remember having a history. And so you find a lot of different sort of theories or ways of trying to make sense of it and why it is there. So not just a sort of DSM-4 listing of symptoms, but looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, a sociological perspective, that we're still trying to figure, we can sort of say what it is and what it looks like, but why it is a whole different matter.
And I'm a big fan of talk therapy. I mean, I just think that you gotta talk to somebody. If you're feeling depressed, you're feeling anxious, you're worried about things. I mean, it's a reoccurring theme almost. I mean, really, I think you get inside your head and it just gets worse. I mean, I think you really have to sort of reach out and talk to somebody, find somebody safe to talk to.
And if we want to be modern about this, they've actually looked at how the brain responds under talk therapy. And what they found, it actually responds in very similar ways to the way the brain responds to medication. So I'm telling people often, it's good medicine.
Right.
It's absolutely good medicine.
You start
therapy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that wasn't terribly scientific,
no,
but it was good enough.
We covered a broad range. I hope that helps somebody out there.
All right. Let's look at the next one.
The next one. I just found out that my 16-year-old daughter has been cutting herself. She's been more withdrawn than usual, but refuses to talk about it. Can you tell me how I can help her? Wow. Yeah. This is pretty common stuff.
That's a heartbreaker.
Yeah. Nobody wants to think that their child is doing something like that.
Well, for the parent, I can't help thinking about, something like the Alliance for the Mentally Ill.
Yeah, NAMI.
They get support, and it's so frightening, when you're a child that, you love and raise, and all of a sudden you get so scared. You're worried about them, and it's really, really difficult. And I don't know I don't know what's helpful. I mean, for the parent, and I'm not sure what the parent can do for the child. I mean, be supportive and loving, and I don't know. What would you?
Yeah, no, it's tough. I think maybe to start with a little bit of reassurance. A lot of people are concerned that cutting is the same thing as being suicidal. And while I don't want to minimize that it's troublesome, it's not healthy, and it can even be dangerous because people that do cut themselves with regularity do at times die because they cut themselves too deeply. But it seems to be more about distress and relieving distress. And while a lot of us might find that hard to imagine, I can cut myself and I would feel better. That actually, with people who cut themselves chronically, who cut themselves over time, that's what they'll describe. So a lot of emotional distress, a lot of tension building up, and then the cutting actually, there's this pain, these endorphins, seems to act as a release to them for all this discomfort they're feeling. And we're not even sure, is it its own disorder? Is it a piece of other disorders, like sort of personality disorders? Yeah. That's sort of what's in the talk, in the literature these days, about maybe we're going to have a different way of looking at this, but distressing nonetheless.
And in of itself, my experience in the hospital was it wasn't just the only thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was cutting, and then there was other things involved and other issues to be concerned with. But personally, I mean, a couple times that I've actually witnessed somebody with multiple scars, I mean, it just breaks my heart. I mean, it's the closest I ever came to like going like flinching. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to think that somebody's in so much pain that the only way to get relief is for hurting themselves. Yeah. And so I'm sure this mother is just overwhelmed and just frightened beyond belief. And I'm sure the daughter is in incredible pain from something. Yeah. Something's not right. And not to sound repetitious, but please, 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 I guess at this point, please see somebody. I mean,
there's help for this.
Yeah, find out what's going on. And maybe the fact that you found out about the cutting is the beginning of an asking for help. Yeah. Because a lot of them keep it secret. Yeah. I'm not sure how her mother found it, but...
yeah, it's probably, I mean, it probably has been kept secret, and it now is starting to reveal itself either through carelessness or an intensifying of these behaviors, doing them more, or like you're saying, you know, we talk about this idea of a cry for help. Right. You know, I want you to notice this, I want you to see this, because I want you to help me. And there, I mean, again, depression, there's the not-healthy coping, suppressing depression, or some anxiety is a part of this as well. And there are very specific treatments around this that help to sort of learn better ways of tolerating distress, better ways of getting one's needs met with other people. And so absolutely, you know, do the best you can. You know, NAMI or you know, support groups for yourself, as well as trying to encourage your daughter into some treatment.
And you know, begin the dialogue, begin talking, non-judgmental, just listening.
Now that's going to be that's got to be hard, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, it's nothing. There's nothing easy about it. Yeah. But yes, I think that would be high on the list.
But in a way, I mean, not being sort of unemotional and being open about this and just wanting to talk about it, it's a very hard thing to pull off. But if you don't do that, then you're just going to drive it deeper. It's going to become a secret. It's going to become hidden. And I think it sounds like that you'd rather know about this and keep the dialogue open in order to try to be helpful.
So please follow up on that. Yeah. And I mean, I hope, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Don't with any of this.
Make a phone call.
Don't struggle along with it.
Okay.
So I have another question. So my 19-year-old son went off to college this year, and we always see him on holidays. When he came home this Christmas, he did not seem like his old self. He was withdrawn and had a funny, distant look in his eyes. We asked him if he was doing drugs, and he said he wasn't, but his behavior continued to be really strange. He goes to school far away, so we can't just drop in on him, and in our phone calls, he doesn't say much. What can we do to figure out if he's doing drugs that seem to be changing his personality, and how can we help? Okay. So this is tough. You're right around 19, gone off to school, ready to sort of be independent and assert himself, and now they're finding out that, this doesn't seem to be going very well.
Right. Well, you know, when I used to work with Dr. Jeffrey Kane, and he once said that he assumes that people are telling him the truth, and then he'll work from that. Yeah. And yet you still want to be, you know, wise about it. You want to look for signs. You want to look for other issues or other concerns. Yeah. And I think, you know, if your son tells you he's not doing drugs, then he's not doing drugs.
Yeah.
But going into a new environment, I presume he's 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
He might be struggling with any number of issues, sexual identity issues. He could be struggling with depression. I mean, who knows? I mean, school anxiety, attention deficit, or competition. He could be lonely. And coming home, not knowing how to deal with it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I know when I went off in the service, and when I came back from the service after 4 years and home on leave, my mother thought I was different.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, I mean, it's, in some ways, it's part of growing up. It's kind of figuring out who you are, but, you know, how you cope with life and you know, the way you live in your world. But I guess, you know.
Yeah, I mean, from this question, we could draw a very broad spectrum of what's going on here, from the this is a natural thing, it will pass, to the other end of this could really be the beginning of you know, of severe mental illness. And if you look at it at the sort of, let's say that the happier end of the spectrum, you know, we're talking about someone in their late teens, early 20s. The job of developing that they have, their task is to really determine who they are as an individual. You know, they sort of pass through not being part of their family, being part of their sort of high school clique, and now that sort of sets them apart from family. And now the next piece, which is really what experts have told me college is really about, is sort of asserting your independence and determining who you are. And so that's a big piece of what he has to do right now when he's at college. And maybe he's struggling with that, right? Like you said, the sexual identity. Maybe he's finding that he's not as competitive anymore when he's now at this higher level, and that can cause, you know, a lot of sort of you know, injury and hard feelings. To then, you know, we've been told for years now, right, as parents, if your kids have a sudden personality change, they're hanging out with different people, they're withdrawn, look for drugs.
Look for drugs.
Absolutely. So I think you guys are on target with that. And the thing is, though, you know, what are you going to do to push this when he is saying, no, we're not going there right now. I don't want to talk about this.
Right.
And two, you know, I mean, you know, sort of one more piece is that this is an age where two very serious illnesses develop. You know, a number: depression, bipolar disorder, or even schizophrenia. This is a time when one of the theories is that it is called, the fancy term is stress diathesis. Basically what that means is you're in a very intense environment, stress, a new situation, and so what's often seen is with going to college, going into boot camp, that these are times when we seem to see the development of schizophrenia, and whether that's actually the cause of having it develop, or it just happens to be these are all things we do at a certain time in our life, and this is the age when the symptom presents itself. I think that's something to be concerned about as well. So there are any number of reasons here to be seeking, you know, mental health help for him. And colleges all have counselors, psychiatrists, mental health departments. So he can, you know, be encouraged to do this at school.
Well, you know, again, I agree with you. You know, look for all those signs, look for other indications, look at grades, you know, whatever else you can do. I guess I would visit him. I mean, you know, at some point, I guess I would get in the car or somewhere to go see him where he lives, and you might, if he's like everybody else, you might feel embarrassed that his parents have come to visit, but you can actually see that he's
instead of that ticket to bring him home, a ticket to bring you to school, right?
See that he's all right. And the other thing I sort of believe in it is that, you know, if you grow up with, you know, a young person and you love them and you care for them, that doesn't ever go away. I mean, sometimes the outside sort of changes and they wear all black or something, or they grow their hair, or they act differently, or get earrings and stuff. That person that you know and love is still there.
Right.
And don't forget that. And you gave them those gifts and stuff. And I guess I want to go on the side. I want to trust them. That they'll work this out. This is what we spent all these years doing, is to sort of figure out who they were and how they're going to live their life. And so I think it's a difficult time. But
and it's mysterious, the things that cause people to change. I mean, in this case, worried about unhealthy behaviors going on, and how are they going to, you know, they want to see him change towards healthier behaviors. And let's say, for example, he's doing drugs, he's not telling them about it, then he's not thinking about this being a problem, he doesn't address it. The key thing that people can do that are providing help for folks in that sort of denial stage or pre-contemplative stage is to keep the relationship going. Whether you're family, whether you're a counselor, to accept them as they are and to continue to be there. So at least there's a trust that's being built in a relationship that then these other things can be built upon.
And I think a lot of kids that are doing drugs, they come home, they look better than ever. I mean, you know, they smile, they laugh. No, really, they're not going to give it away, you know. They're going to smoke a pot, they're doing coke, they're doing whatever they do. Doesn't mean they're drug addicts, it means they're experimenting, it means they're trying drugs or doing drugs. This sounds a little bit different. And that's why I say, I think I take his word for it. Maybe he's not. Maybe that's part of his struggle, is he doesn't fit in. Maybe everybody else is doing Adderall. Everybody else is smoking pot. And he doesn't feel comfortable. He doesn't feel right there. Again, you know, it's something you need to be aware of, something you look for at that age, going off to college and stuff, but I would look for other things.
There's no simple answer to this.
No,
There's
well, none
a
of this stuff is.
broad range here.
And I would, go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Let's try another one.
Let's try another one.
I hope that was okay.
Okay. My mother's 76 years old. She's always been anxious and critical her whole life, but it just seems to be getting worse and worse. My sister thinks we should confront her on these behaviors, but I don't. I don't think she will ever change, so why go through all that just to alienate her? What do you think? Yeah, you know, this. I mean, we were talking about some of this earlier with a very, you know, a book that's just come out about a very famous study that has followed a lot of Harvard students throughout various stages of their lives.
Right, I was reading a study by George Vaillant, and it's called the Grant Study done at Harvard, and they started following, it's a longitude study rather than a cross-section, and it's really interesting because some of the guys, it was the class of 41, 42, 43, was the original cohort. And they followed them now into their 90s now. 90s, wow. And they've seen this change. But, you know, this thing here, I just can't help thinking that, well, the mother, you know, in a few years I'll be 76.
Okay,
hopefully.
So watch where we go on this one, right?
Well, you know, and I don't think I'm going to change. And people may think I'm worse than I was before because I can't.
Which is a change.
Which is possible. So I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know. I mean, as you get older, there's things that you get frightened of, like anxiety. You get worried about. You're worried about your money. You're worried about how this is going to end. Some of your peers, some of the people you might have died. You might be a lot of different things. There might be some medical problems that she's not talking about that are part of her life. I don't know. I don't think she's going to get worse. And I've sort of gotten to a point now where I try and listen to others. So when the sisters say, maybe leave her alone, do you really want to get in their face? And I can't help thinking of like Shakespeare or somebody, instead of, you know, like the three sisters confront, and, you know, they all play their different roles that they've been playing all their life, you know, the one that's in her face and the one, so I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that for that. I mean, quite frankly.
And I always have, you know, concerns about ageism, which is, you know, a way of sort of prejudicing yourself about older people. And, you know, one very common way this happens is with alcohol, for example. Oh, they're old, let them drink, you know, that's okay, you know, she should have some enjoyment. And that way can really miss that this is having some impact on their life at a later stage. And like you're saying, you know, we're developing, you know, till the day we die. And one of the stage that she's in right now has to do with how satisfied she is with her life, because she's reached a stage now where she can't make changes. You know, she's not going to get a new career. She's not going to start a new family. Financial situation is probably done at this point. And so this sort of, you know, idea of potentially dealing with despair at this stage, especially if she's been critical and an anxious person throughout her life, this could be a very real thing that she's dealing with right now. Yeah. And
I knew Dr. Timothy Rowland. You know, he used to work with geriatric patients.
Specializes in geriatrics.
He used to, and I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, you know, if you can find the right doctor, if you can get her to talk to a geriatric psychiatrist or a geriatric doctor in general, and see if there are any other issues that need to be like ruled out, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Like this is the beginning, as I say, a type of dementia, for example,
or
that
something
can
like
cause
something else going
anxiety.
on. Is there some other concern? And again, I don't know, how do you approach this with your mother, or get her to the hospital, or take her to a doctor? But I guess I would do that. I mean, if it got to a point where the anxiety was crippling, or the criticalness is driving away the kids, or driving away the grandchildren, or she's isolating. I mean, I don't know exactly, but...
And another thing, I would suggest enlisting your family practice doctor in this, her doctor, because that's often something that at this age, you know, as much as I hate to say it, there's less and less sort of respect for the doctor's opinions as people become sort of more independent and with successive generations. But her generation, 76 years old, they still have a respect for their doctor and what they say. So you might, again, not to be you know, devious about this, but you might call up the doctor and say you have some concerns that her personality is changing, she needs to be more anxious. And this way he could do what we classically talk about, rule out medical causes for what's going on. So he could then have a talk with her and maybe see if she has, you know, something she might reveal to him. And then they might be able to, if she's open to that, there are specific therapies, you know, talk therapies, that actually deal with this sort of, you know, life changes and how do you sort of adjust to the various stages in your life.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Not bad. A very good therapy, interpersonal psychotherapy, which is one of these things called sort of manualized therapy. There's very good guidance about it, very effective. This sort of looks back at taking stock of what life has been like, what a certain stages has been about, and then trying to sort of redefine that or rewrite that history as then a way of sort of then taking it forward to what you would like to have your life be like now. Right. Can be very effective, as well as, you know, medications and you know, supportive talk therapy in general. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Now I noticed that there is a question that came up. We won't have time to do it today. Maybe we can follow up next week. But it was about autism.
Right.
And recently I read where they actually have suggested that some folks with Asperger's actually get better with time.
Right.
It was an article in the paper, I think it was in the Times, but it was basically like this is sort of like good news. And that with a lot of therapy and a lot of practice and a lot of hard work, that they actually do improve and they do get better.
Right.
And I think that's really been a change, a change for me. In some of my learning, I sort of, once you were a certain illness, it didn't move.
For life.
You know, especially like with addicts and alcoholics, it wasn't safe to go back to drinking once you stop. You know, you're always at risk to start up again. But, you know, there are people who struggle and get better. They go to therapy and they do get better and they get help. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we don't acknowledge that.
Right, yeah.
We don't acknowledge that people have this incredible ability to get better. And I read something about autism, and I'll just finish up with this. It's just this one guy wrote and said, you know, we should work on their skills. We should, you know, there are skills there, and we should work with those skills rather than focusing on deficits. Right. And thinking more about, like, you know, what are the skills that this person, and then how can we augment it, but also to appreciate what there are, what they can do.
Yeah, because it seemed like, I mean, you see these symptoms almost in the beginning at birth with their difficulty with relating with other people. They seem more interested in objects than they do the interpersonal interaction. So there's this idea that's sort of very hardwired, but like you're saying, finding that with very focused and intense early education, that they begin to develop and they actually sort of learn better how to interact with other people, and in that way sort of make that connection. And then find that there's actually, you know, hope for improving how well they do, how well they get along with other people.
And get away from measuring children just purely on academic A's.
Right.
There's a lot of way to look at children's skills and abilities. I mean, besides, you know, A's. Anyway, I mean, A's are handy, they're nice, everybody likes a good report card, but...
There are a lot of ways to love our kids.
That's right, and be careful how you measure them. So, anyway, it's... I don't know if we did anything concrete, but it were interesting questions.
We're just talking about it, right?
We're just talking about it. And we hope everybody who sends in these questions continue to look and talk some more and get some more help. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.